are in response to what happened in Belgium, which I refuse to read the news report because I do not want to hear about people getting murdered and blown up, or more importantly, the names of these pieces of trash that think that this is some kind of Islamic way. It is not. So, what happened here? Well, first of all, you understand that since the 80s, Islam has been taken and hijacked. What happened was the Russians invaded Afghanistan, so the Saudis sent missionaries in the form of people like bin Laden and a lot of the Wahhabis. And the Wahhabis basically Wahhabitized the culture of Islam. And what they did was they inspired Sharia law, they inspired extremism, and it's not Islamic. It's infidel behavior because what they're doing is they're abusing people in their own religion that is absolutely condemned in their own religion, but they say, well, I got an AK, so I can do it. And so what happened was, the support of bin Laden through the United States and other sources, and the Afghan culture, which already was tribal, and then they had tribal leadership over this. And so what happened was it started this radicalization in the movement. Now what's happened too is the Middle East has basically gone through a lot of radical change since then. And so what's happened basically is we know that the Saudi way is the Sunni Wahhabi Sharia, where there's a lot of gender inequalities, and there is a lot of this attitude out there, where there's a lot of these people think bin Laden was a martyr when we know bin Laden killed more Muslims than he killed of anybody else. Like there were more, for every American bin Laden killed, he probably killed at least 10 times as many Muslims because he would kill anybody just to get to Americans. So basically, then we see basically they call himself ISIS now. Traditionally it was Al Qaeda, then Al Qaeda went to Iraq, and then you had this conditioned population from the whole dictatorship, where Saddam Hussein basically desensitized people, he terrorized them, he absolutely had this brutal population that had this conditioning from the insurgency and the dictatorship. And Al Qaeda came in there, gave him a little training. The Saudi foreign fighters came in there, gave him a little inspiration. Next thing you knew it, you had ISIS. Now, what is ISIS? It's the infidel who stole Iraq and Syria, because basically they break every rule in their own religion, so they're not even Muslims, because real Muslims accept other religions and don't believe in this kind of garbage. But what happens is you have a few of these psychos that corner the rest of the Muslims, and they threaten them into extremism, say, look, we'll do horrible stuff to you, just like the Mexican cartels do. And they threaten and rule with an iron fist, and so people aren't strong enough to stand up against these people. And so what's happening in Europe is you'll have some of these imams and leaders and people like Chudhary who are really trying to inspire people to do absolutely un-Islamic stuff, because we know Muhammad was virulently against mutilation of the body. Islam is just like Judaism in its regard for cremation and embalming. We know those two religions absolutely condemn the practices of altering the body. So why would a person that is Muslim think it's Islamic to blow your own body up and take out other people? It is not. And I can guarantee you there were plenty of Muslims minding their own business killed in Belgium or injured in this attack. And if there weren't, there's plenty that do not agree with it, and probably a vast majority. But what's happening is these people are trying to hijack it for everybody else. And so right now there's a split because, there's a lot of women in Islam right now who are being treated like absolute garbage, and they're being exploited, forced into marriage and everything. And so this isn't Islam. This is basically the element of where it reverts to what people would think is a cult. Now, here's the thing. If you say behead those who insult Islam, you just insulted it yourself, because you're making it look like a cult to everybody else. And chances are you're just some new convert with an identity crisis who's never been to the Middle East. You have never gone from Mecca to Medina, and yet you think you're the biggest Muslim in the world because you want to kill people who are not in that religion. It's an example of fascism. It is not Islam. It's an example of empty little losers that think they got to show this identity to project on other people. And so what's happened in Belgium, in the UK, in France, ISIS are infidel. And they are absolutely empty sacks of trash that just want to be creative in abusing people, like the Japanese in World War II. And they show these elements and parallels. And then they act like the Nazis of this generation. So it's a huge concern now. And what needs to be done to fight this is basically work on the social conditions in the Middle East, because there's a lot of these conditions that keep setting the tone for this stuff to keep happening. And as long as you keep focusing on democratizing the Middle East and all this government change, you give a vacuum for these other extremists to come in there. What they need to do is start working from the bottom up with the population, getting people to stop teaching forcing people to hate, and it would be safer for Israel if they improved the water qualities in Palestine rather than getting these leaders together at Disneyland, because it won't make any difference in the people's minds. They might fix it if they started getting people together and making it less profitable for people to join these extremists and saying, look, we'll irrigate the Middle East, we'll help rebuild that part of the world, we'll give jobs. It would probably work, but then these extremists would fight it. And you can't be like Jimmy Carter in this regard and say, oh, we're pulling out, we can't stand this. You'd have to be more like Reagan and say, no, we're going to keep going. And see, this is a concern because the Middle East is one of those parts of the world that can become easily radicalized. But Islam is not in itself a cult. There's a lot of times there's similarities to Christianity. And a true Muslim and a true Jew and a true Christian will all become great friends and they'll accept each other. But then you have people drunk with their attitudes and supremacy. And this is where then you start to see this. And so, to be politically correct, there's Islamic, Christian, and Zionist extremism on all grounds, on all different levels. And this all plays in because if the Christian extremism supports Israel and expanding into Palestinian territory, then you'll have Palestinian extremists that want to fight Israel more. And at the same time, this is where there needs to be this compromise. And true followers want to accept other people of other religions and say we're all equal under the same God. But the problem is you've had these leaders that have said in the decades before, you will breed with the Europeans and all this trash. And then you have these human pigs in the street that ought to honestly be sent to the guys in jail if they want to breed with the Europeans. It might as well be a guy in the jail the way they're going. So, the way they're treating women, it gets to a point where they ought to honestly have some women in Islam that take a huge bat. Like, seriously, in Europe, you need some Elie Mornos types to deal with those dudes. And you need some streetwalkers in Europe to go walking around dressed like a civilian just to bait these dudes and fuck them up. So honestly, this is my opinion, and I think this is a heavy issue, but it has to be solved in a lot of levels. And, this is where ISIS is not Islamic. ISIS are a bunch of freakish wackos that have sex with animals and bury their cousins and abuse little kids, and they have absolutely no credibility to be seen as anything. And that territory ought to be turned over to the UN so they can actually rebuild it and start getting people away from the extremism, because it's just going to keep going. Because you got to understand the Middle East and the history of it, and the radicalism and the takeover. And then you start to see what's really going on. They need to start taking a stronger stance in the Saudi royal family. And they need to stop promoting their trash to the rest of the world, because it just hasn't done anything. And if they support their proxy war in Yemen and start going around using people to fight their stupid political war, I see it like this. We've had our bin Laden, you'll have yours. And then those people will sooner or later realize the Saudis were playing them, along with the Iranians. And then let's see what's going to happen next. So, this is my video, and hope it helps.